Dit is Main Street Los Altos. Los Altos is een heel klein dorpje in Silicon Valley. 2 kilometer die kant op ligt het hoofdkantoor van Apple. Maar hier boven die kledingwinkel zit zo'n typische start-up die je hier ziet in Silicon Valley. In een heel klein, aftans lelijk kantoortje zit het nieuwe bedrijf van Michiel Gifford, de ongekroonde koning van de hardware van Silicon Valley. Hij werkte bij Sun op de SPARCstation, bij Apple op de Macintosh-producten, bij Microsoft op de Xbox. Hij weet alles van hardware, is bezig met iets nieuws, heet Wim Labs. Nepnaam, zegt hij ook, gaat straks absoluut anders heten. Met kerst moeten producten al verkrijgbaar zijn. Hij wil niet vertellen wat het is. Het is allemaal stealth, maar we gaan toch kijken.
I spent 7 years at Sun doing a variety of things there. I had the pleasure of being part of the SPARCstation 1 effort with Andy Bechtolsheim and the team. It was a startup inside of a large company. It kind of gave you that flair. Andy rented a building off campus and we all
Andy, one
migrated
of the founders,
there.
Right?
Yeah, Andy Bechtolsheim, one of the founders at Sun.
And one of the first guys to put money into Google.
Absolutely correct. And Broadcom, not Broadcom, Brocade. And a few other companies.
He's done well.
He's done very, very well.
For a German.
Truly an inspiration. It was a blast being part of that, and it was the security of a large company at Sun, but yet a startup where you got to kind of run fast and break the rules and be a little crazy. I left to do a startup company. Then I said, all right, I've done a startup inside of a big company. That was interesting. Now let's go do a real startup. It was a garage in Menlo Park, a company called Visioneer. We built scanners, hardware and software for sheet-fed scanners.
For what kind of scanner?
For sheet-fed scanners. The idea was
Sheet-fed
take the flatbed idea, put it into a small sheet-fed scanner behind your keyboard. Insert the paper, launches the application, scans the document, then you can do one of 4 things. Fax, file, copy, or edit. Drag it to your fax icon, send it out electronic fax. Send it to your printer and make a copy of it. File it, obviously, and then edit it through OCR software. At the time it was Care and Calera and some of the OCR things were evolving. So we built, 4 years we built 9 products. We went public halfway through our 4-year run. We raised $50 million on an IPO in 1995 when you really had to be profitable.
In those days, I think, that's when I got into business. I think you had to have like 4 quarters of profitability and then have like a 30 million revenue number that you had to hit or something. Those were some...
I think those were the metrics.
Those were the metrics.
We hit 2 quarters of profitability just. We signed very large ODM deals with both HP and Compaq, and those helped us kind of migrate up that path towards an IPO. I built hardware in southern China. I built hardware in Singapore. We built hardware on the East Coast. And it was really a fun time for me.
All the weird exotic places. Singapore, China, the East Coast.
Well, and at that time they were kind of exotic. You know, East Coast, I don't know about that so much. But, we left the East Coast. We came to California. And it was really an amazing time because it was for me, I had engineering teams, I managed engineering teams. This was an opportunity to manage teams that were on the outside. And at that point, I was talking about how do we leverage things? How do we not build a 100-person engineering team? How do I go buy engineering resources from these various different companies?
So when you went public, how old was the company and how many employees did you guys have?
We were 2 years old, and we were about 2 years old in 95. Company was founded in 93. In 95, we IPO'd in December, and
it was Visioneer, right?
It was Visioneer. And they brought in a turnaround team in, 97. And most of the executive team and the core group left the company at that point. And they ended up selling the software off to a joint venture with Xerox and sold the hardware to a Taiwanese company. And ironically, thinking about hardware, DataQuest set a report out that said there were going to be 20 million scanners sold.
It was much smaller.
It was exactly correct. It was about a 2 million unit market at the time. They projected 10 to 20 million units. Everybody rushed to this potential gold mine.
Yeah.
And in the end, it didn't materialize. But in the process, a great product kind of got lost. Which was our sheet-fed scanner. Opportunity to do imaging and scanning. We could scan a full page of color text in 6 seconds. Launch an application automatically, no power switch. Hardware was about $250 US at the time.
Just because of the competition, of the low price competition, knocked you guys out of the market.
Not too long after that, you could buy a flatbed scanner with high resolution for $79 US. We couldn't compete, economically speaking, because we hadn't gone through that natural evolution of cost reduction and improvement over time. We couldn't compete. As a consequence, the company I believe it still exists in a very benign form today.
What happened to you? You sold all your shares before the whole thing tanked? Or?
No, I didn't actually. I rode that. I call that my successful failure. I did everything you were supposed to do. We built fabulous products. We set up alliances and partnerships all over the world. We built some world-class software. We won all the industry awards you were supposed to. We just didn't make a lot of money along the way. But we did some wonderful things. Great education.
But at a certain point, that company must have been worth a couple $100 million if you go public.
You know, I looking back on it, I'm not quite sure what our market cap was at the time, but by all metrics, we were doing
You were just looking
very,
at the
very
hardware.
well.
You never looked at the numbers?
Well, I did actually. Maybe not as much as I should have. Very kind of you to point that out.
No, I'm just asking.
I should have looked a little bit more closely at it, to be clear. But it was a wonderful experience for me because I learned a lot about working collaboratively. I learned a lot about building hardware and leveraging engineering resources around the world. And that really was a foundation for me, and I've spent the next X amount of years doing exactly that. I left there.
And where did you go then?
I went to Web TV. I joined Web TV when there were about 350 people.
And at that time, they were already owned by Microsoft?
They weren't. The offer was in place. As a matter of fact, I accepted my offer the day the Department of Justice approved the acquisition.
Oh.
So I actually started as a Microsoft employee, and we stayed in Palo Alto as a small entity. I'm going to guess we were about 350 to 400 people.
You call that a small entity?
Well, in contrast to what we became later, yeah, it was actually relatively small, although it was a large group. We were building analog set-top boxes. We were rapidly moving towards digital set-top boxes. I came in to do product design.
So, and what happened with Web TV?
Web TV, you know, it was a really interesting experience. Web TV was about the internet for everybody else. It really was a great product, I think a little bit ahead of its time. The user interface and the interaction and the product itself was relatively simple. It allowed
Could you explain what the product was?
The product was a set-top box that allowed you to connect to your television, plug in a phone cord, phone cable, and be able to access the internet via your phone line. It was a really simple experience. It wasn't
and
a
you saw it on the TV,
experience.
right? And you saw it. You saw every website on television.
Correct. So it really was the first 10-foot UI. It really was small keyboard, remote control, not dissimilar to what you have for your TV, and be able to access the internet and do web browsing and do email and a whole host of other types of things.
Yeah.
Web TV built the hardware, they built the experience, they built the software, they built the service behind it. It really was a great product, a little bit ahead of its time. We built analog set-top boxes. We migrated to digital set-top boxes. Later, we built set-top boxes which included satellite capabilities, digital satellite capabilities. We built Ultimate TV. I stayed with the company for about 7 years. 5 of those years was doing set-top boxes. The last 2 years, we closed down the satellite product group, and Microsoft shifted my whole engineering team of about 50 people over into Xbox.
Microsoft was losing money on every hardware piece.
Well, it wasn't a profitable business, I don't believe, at the time. I believe that
They
was
never
part
broke
of
it
the
down,
model.
I think, right? I mean, they lose money on the hardware, and then they make money on the games, obviously.
Presumably, yeah.
But you can't, presumably. But
Yeah.
I think your job was to get the cost down. on
My
the
job
Xbox,
was to get
right?
the cost down, yeah, absolutely.
Or the
So-
performance up for the same price. Which was it?
Correct. Well, both. Performance up, cost down. The goal was always to, right?
To do both.
Contradictions of terms?
Yeah.
Well, you actually can
And
do
hurry
both.
up.
Well, and we did a pretty good job. I have to give a lot of credit to Microsoft. And the 7 years I was at Microsoft, honestly speaking, was some of the best of my career.
You stayed here or you moved up to Seattle?
I flew to Seattle the last 2 years every week for 2 years. I had part of my team in Seattle for Xbox, part of my team here in Silicon Valley. Microsoft built a campus here in Mountain View, not too far from where we are right now. I'm sure you've been on campus there.
Yes.
And Web TV was there, Hotmail was there, MSN TV was there. We were the Ultimate TV group. Xbox maintained a small contingent in Silicon Valley, about 70 people. Part of it was a semiconductor team, part of it was my systems engineering group and team. Plus I had a team in Seattle at the nucleus of the Xbox group and team at the time.
And how was that at Xbox? Because I remember Robbie Bach started it pretty much outside of Microsoft. I mean, he had a lot of free range for a Microsoft employee. At the time.
It was great for me because it was very similar to Andy Bechtolsheim at Sun spinning out and doing a small startup within a large company. Microsoft, as a company, made a huge commitment to it, take on big, bold challenges,
Take on Sony, basically.
Absolutely, and a willingness to go see it through, and the perseverance that Microsoft puts against something is I applaud it.
For a company that really didn't specialize in hardware other than keyboards and the odd mouse out there.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, they have a great hardware team there that's doing keyboards and mice and other types of innovation. They drew from that group. They hired from the outside. They brought in a wonderful team underneath Jay Allard and Robbie in the group. A guy named Todd Humdahl was running the hardware side of it. I worked for Todd. I came in and took over the console side of it. I had a counterpart on the operations side. And we built 6 different versions of the product in the 2 years that I was part of the group. We took the cost down by roughly 50%. We did really, really well in effective engineering. We had great manufacturing partners that were domestic, operating in southern China again. We did pretty well. And then part of the group spun out to go do Xbox 360. Yeah. I stayed for my 2 years there, and really I enjoyed the time that I had at Microsoft, but it was time for me to try something new.
Suddenly you're up at Apple.
Well, I did, and so there's a gentleman I've worked with for a bunch of years who I have a ton of respect for and frankly a lot of fun with. He's here in the building here somewhere. His name is Tim Bucher, and Tim had left, started a company, built it up, and
Tim had left
Microsoft.
Microsoft, yeah.
And he started a new company, actually in the building that we're sitting in today. He sold it to Seagate and was encouraged to go to Apple, working for John Rubinstein. And Tim and I had worked together at Microsoft for a number of years. I think we were a pretty good team. He called and said, hey, we're doing some really fun things here. We want to shift things around a little bit, see if we can go do more product than we're doing today. How'd you like to come join us? And so I left Microsoft, and after 2 years of a lot of travel and being away from home, I came back to Silicon Valley and joined Tim at Apple and stayed for about 2 years. Looked at most of the Macintosh products the entire 2 years I was there. I had program management and managed a team of about 17 program managers building all the Mac products. Interesting business. The Mac products themselves, with a Unix underpinning operating system-wise, and the applications that went along with it, just the attention to detail, the true spectacular
that you were not used to at Microsoft.
That was let's just say it was a slightly different market. Building an Xbox, sub $300, sub $300 SRP retail brings it, at an extremely high volume, brings a different approach to design.
Which means you're basically paying the Chinese $50 for the damn thing.
Well, 50 might be a bit of a stretch, but you're paying quite a bit to have the product manufactured offshore.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then there's the shipping, obviously, but then still, to
logistics
get it in the stores and logistics, but to get them in the store under $300 makes it a very cheap device.
It means that your attention to detail cost-wise is exponentially higher than if you're building something that has a cost of goods of $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that you don't maintain that attention to detail, because it's very, very important. Nonetheless, you have the opportunity at different gross margin points and at different cost points to put a little bit more into the design. And Apple's always been a no compromise about design. That's one of the things I admire about the products they make. A wonderful experience in the context of I got to see Apple produce about 70 products during the 2 years I was there. Generated on average $6 billion US in gross revenue per year. On average about 35 products a year at the time. Some of them were what companies refer to as speed bumps. They're a new processor, a new CPU, new graphics core, perhaps some quality improvements, the same basic product, usually transparent to the consumer, with the exception of performance, of course.
So you were in the Macintosh products, right? So
yeah, all the Macs.
All the Macs, basically.
All the Macs. Desktop consumer, Power Macs, servers, mobile Macs, and accessories.
Let's face it, that is a cool business.
It's a really cool business, and I, independent of our world politics and views and things, they build spectacular products. They have great partnerships around the world, and they truly are one of the few existing today that say no compromises.
Why did you leave Apple in 2005?
Well, the experience of doing 2 startups inside of large companies and then a startup outside of a large company, I really wanted to do one more startup company. I really wanted to have the opportunity to build a company, to go build some products that were fun and interesting, and to be a little bit more tightly coupled to the design side. My job at Apple wasn't a design job. My job at Apple really was ensuring that designs got executed, that we could go come up with a specification for a product, design, engineer, develop, qualify, and put that product into production. In the startup that I did post-Apple, I got to be involved in more of the creative side of things.
And which startup was that?
It was called Zermatt. I think you know a little bit about the company. Zermatt.
I think when it started, I was down the hall here.
Yeah,
in this
absolutely.
little building.
Zermatt was incubated in the building that we're sitting in today.
Basically taking on Apple. taking on the iPod?
Well, actually, we really like to think of it slightly differently. We wanted to create a consumer experience in a product that delivered video and audio content wirelessly. And we really wanted to create an experience. We partnered with Sirius Satellite Radio. We partnered with SanDisk to build a product with SanDisk, both of which were very publicly discussed and described. We really wanted to deliver something different than the iPod was at the time. And at the time, iPod, great product, allowed you to manage your music, allowed you later to manage your video content.
Well, it's a hard disk player, basically.
It is. We referred to it as a bag of discs, and that's not a bad thing. Actually, it does it extraordinarily well. What we wanted to do was add some level of connectivity to it, and you couldn't wander through Taiwan or China or Hong Kong or anywhere else and buy a product that had Wi-Fi enabled connectivity. So we decided to build a product. And that included the hardware itself, although we managed it with a relatively small team, built all of our products, of course, in China or Taiwan,
Yeah.
and built the applications, the operating system, the services. We did the hard work and the heavy lifting around Wi-Fi connectivity and Bluetooth and those other kinds of things that at the time you couldn't go out and ODM or buy one, so we created one.
Yeah, but people expected all the performance that was in an iPod, and then you added to that basically
Exactly.
all the connectivity, the Wi-Fi,
Exactly.
Bluetooth connections and
That's
stuff.
correct.
And you had to get them in a small little box.
You bet.
But what happened with the product? What happened? It came out and it didn't sell much, it seemed.
Well, the Sirius Satellite product actually has done quite well. We did several versions of the product with Sirius Satellite Radio. Our company did the software, we did the user experience interaction, we did a lot of the hardware engineering and development.
It's basically a radio player now.
Exactly correct.
Satellite
it's
radio
it's
player.
Sirius Satellite Radio in your hand, mobile. You can walk around with it. Outdoors, of course, you have to have access to a satellite.
Yeah.
But it really truly was a high volumetric density satellite receiver in your hand, clipped on your belt that you could take with you. Great product. The Sirius Satellite product still sells today. You can still walk into a store.
And you renamed the company to Zing, right? Because it
We
started.
renamed the company. We started with a stealth name, of course.
Why, of
the
course?
company
Why do
Zing.
you? Why? For Europeans, it's tough to understand. Why do you start under a different name?
Generally speaking here, starting under a different name allows you to maintain a high level of anonymity. There's a lot of activity here in the Valley. There's, Apple does it, I'll use Apple as a great example. Apple believes clearly in anonymity and confidentiality up to the point they launch a product. That anonymity and that ability to maintain privacy and confidentiality up to the point they launch the product increases the buzz around the product, increases the amount of visibility it's going to get when it launches, and there's tangible value associated.
Yeah, but if
with that.
you're
It's marketing.
Well, okay, it's marketing. But let's
It's
say
marketing.
you call it Zing from the start. Who cares? Nobody knows what Zing is.
Well,
You
nobody
called it
knew
Zermatt
True,
first.
true. But allowing us to operate underneath Zermatt and do our early stealth activities and work and fly completely under the radar of the watchers in the Valley and the industry as a whole allowed us to experiment with our products and not have our ultimate brand name be associated with it prematurely.
Okay. So that means if you screw something up, nobody knows.
That's exactly what it means. Very well said.
So I remember you guys even had a website with something called Zermatt Ski Systems. I remember
We
that.
did. It was referred to as digital snow skis, I think.
Digital
It's a,
snow skis,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And I was thinking, what the hell? I was testing satellite radio.
Right. Well, and that was again trying to fly underneath the radar and make sure that we could hold on to our value proposition ourselves as long as we could. And that is part of the folklore here. It really is about how do you collect a group of people who are very visible and very public. They've done great things in a bunch of different companies. Therefore, people seek them out. The talented people in the Valley that you want to go bring in to help you build these kinds of things, they're very public. They're very visible here in the Valley. As you pull
Sort of
together
like
that-
stars.
Absolutely, and not dissimilar. Another great example, Amazon has a company here called Lab 126.
Yeah.
Lab 126, again, was a stealth company. It was a stealth name. They took a very stealth approach to building something early on, allowing them to launch a product
Which
in
became
front
the
of others,
Kindle.
which became Kindle. And we're starting a new company right now. We're in the process of creating our story.
Yeah, so let's finish out what happened with Zing. Zermatt became Zing, and then you guys sold it
Zermatt
to Dell
became
pretty
Zing.
quick, I think.
You bet. And
So suddenly you've worked at Sun,
Sun,
at
Microsoft,
Microsoft, at Apple, and at Dell.
and Dell. The Dell, we had actually spoken to Michael Dell very early on. Our founder and CEO, Tim Bucher, had a good relationship with Michael Dell through our Microsoft days. And Dell came to us and really was trying to understand what we were doing as it related to digital music and delivering musical content. We talked to Michael very early on in the formation of the company and talked about collaborating on some products. It wasn't a good fit at the time. We shook hands and said, let's follow up a year or 18 months from now. And that's exactly what happened. 18 months into our life cycle in building products, Michael Dell had another conversation with our CEO. And at the time, it really was about taking the company to the next level. And Dell approached us and said, hey, we'd like to do something together. We really like what you've done in the past. We'd like to do something like that. We love the team. We love the dynamics of what you're creating and what you've created so far. Let's talk. That turned into an acquisition, and Dell acquired the company. We were about 2.5 years along at that point. We're acquired by Dell. We're pulled into the Dell Consumer Group. And we were part of the group I was with the group for about another 15, almost 18 months. And then decided it was time for me to try another startup company.
And were you happy with what Dell did with the company?
Well, happy is an interesting choice of words. Dell is a really interesting company.
Well, that's what we're all usually going for in the restaurant. We go for happy.
Right.
I don't know what you guys go for in Silicon Valley.
Well, of course we want to be happy, but happiness comes in a variety of forms. I think our expectation was that the Dell Consumer Group would really be able to embrace what we were doing. However, we were more than 100 people. 80% of those people were software in nature. I had a relatively small hardware team. We had been building a product that we had high hopes and expectations would be part of the Dell ecosystem and world on the consumer side of things. And for me personally, those products didn't see daylight, haven't seen daylight yet. Perhaps they will in the future. But Dell is a very, very large business. They focused very heavily on netbooks and a variety of products in recent times. I think you've seen some recent announcement of things they're doing as part of the consumer group. And it really took a little bit of a turn for what I personally had expected, so I decided it was time for me to start something new and interesting. You're asking me to make a bet today?
Yeah.
I'd bet on my old friends at Microsoft.
Don't stop believing.